justification. You said we definitely got legal justification. We've got absolutely fine.
We said completely accurately, the Attorney General had said that the war was legally authorised, which it was. But the important thing is to stress why. Look, you know, one of the things people often ask me, who are more friendly to me, okay, will say to me, "Why did you take such a momentous decision, which you knew was extremely unpopular in many quarters, and so on and so forth?" And the answer to that is, because I believed strongly then and now, you don't take a risk on this issue anymore. And that's the reason why, for example, on Iran today, I'm in exactly the same position. I would never, not on my watch if I had anything to do with it, allow Iran to acquire nuclear weapons capability.
Going back to the legal issue, you didn't even tell the Cabinet about the nuances and the problems with the legal problem.
The Attorney General himself came to Cabinet. There was a discussion at Cabinet about it. Look, again, one of the myths, because what happens in a situation like this is that people always want to look for a conspiracy, or they want to look for some, you know, it was about oil, or it was to do with some other American strategy. It was for the reasons that we gave.
Well,
and
you say that.
We had the Cabinet involved every part of the way. In the end, it was a decision. Now, if I'd taken the opposite decision, and let's supposing America had then decided not to continue, Saddam would still be in power today, with his two sons. Now, you can have an argument about that. I'm not saying that I have to persuade you. I'm simply saying it is at least arguable, given the hundreds of thousands that died under Saddam, given the wars that he started, given what he did, given the fact that he developed WMD and used them, even against his own people. I mean, thousands dying in a single day in an attack on a Kurdish village. It is at least arguable that the world is better off without him than with him.
The vote in the House of Commons and the reporting of the situation, of which I was part. I can vividly remember being shown the dossier, and you know, the 45-minute claim is here, the map is here. Go out there
and
tell people.
45-minute claim.
Well, it was you know, it was in the dossier. It was in your forward.
Yes, but it was then never. I think we ended up with a situation in which, of the thousands of written questions it was twice asked about, in the thousands of oral questions
because
never asked
it was true.
No.
The reason I'm banging on about this is that it's the same atmosphere, the same narrative, which allows the current Deputy Prime Minister to stand up in the House of Commons over there and say it was an illegal war.
Yeah, but you see, in the end, I mean...
And lots of people agree with him.
Well, this debate will go on. My only point at the moment, because I'm not going to persuade you know, you or you, me, or I mean, the viewer or who disagrees with the decision. The reason I do this is just so that people understand there is another point of view. And all I say to people is keep an open mind about it, because we are about to face, in respect of Iran, a very similar type of decision.
And I want to come on to that later on, absolutely. Before the war happened, a lot of people, I mean, not least John Major and many other people, were saying in public and in private, Iraq is a dangerous, fissile, complicated country. It has Iran squatting on the border. And you knew also that Al-Qaeda were looking for a new battlefield. Should not the planning have been much better?
What very nearly tipped Iraq into the abyss, and only the surge, basically, and the work that was being done by our special forces, amongst others, saved us from, was the external involvement of Al-Qaeda and of Iran. Now, that was not something that was foreseen.
What about, you know, the
fact is...
de-Baathification? What about the civil society? What about that? I mean, there was an implosion, particularly in the north and around Baghdad.
There was, but the position would have been and could have been stabilised, but for the external interference.
You kick the door down and go into somebody else's country, you have an absolute responsibility then for security and life in that country afterwards. 100,000 plus people certainly died because of that, some people say more. What do you say to all of those people who just simply think that the blood sacrifice, the 6-year carnage was too much? Given that Saddam didn't have WMD at the time, that it was too much, it wasn't worth it.
What I say to them is that if you look at what happened under Saddam, there was also carnage. There were hundreds of thousands of people who died under Saddam. So if you go to Iraq today and you talk to people, yes, there will be a lot of people who will say what you've just said, but there will be many, many others who will say as one Iraqi said to me, are you saying we've got a choice of rule by Saddam or rule by terror, but we can't have what you want?
You put the case for it not being worth it, and then you quote the Iraqi, but you never yourself quite come to a definitive view.
No, my definitive view in the end is that I believe we were right to remove Saddam.
If you knew then what you know now about the consequences of it, would you do it again?
No, as I've always said to people, I still believe it was the right decision. Now,
but you must have regrets about the way it happened.
Look, of course...
The way it was done.
You cannot possibly not feel the most immense sadness about the lives lost, not just our own soldiers, but the ordinary civilians. The point that I make, however, is if we'd left Saddam there, we'd also have had a problem. So all I say to people is it was a really difficult choice, this.
So you do it again?
And I personally believe it was the right decision, but I totally understand why people take the opposite point of view. All I ask about this is that there is an understanding both of the complexity of the decision and not a sense in which, but had you taken the opposite decision or allowed America to go in its own, said we're going to stay out not merely incidentally of the invasion, but of the aftermath as well, and of the coalition of some 30 countries that supported America in that if we'd stayed out of that, or if America hadn't acted and Saddam was still there, there would also have been consequences. And in my view, it is at least arguable that a Saddam with the technical know-how, with the oil money, because sanctions would have been lifted, he would have had massive amounts of resource. He would have had, as the Iraq Survey Group find, the desire to reconstitute his WMD program. And my view is he would have been a competitor in extremism to Iran today.
Sure. At the Chilcot inquiry, you were asked to say sorry, if there's anything you'd like to apologise for or say sorry. And what I was going to ask you is, I mean, we've been talking, it's an interview, but to all the people looking, watching, who still feel very angry and upset about this, is there anything further that you want to say to them?
Well, look, how can you not feel sorry about people who have died? I mean, you would be inhuman if you didn't think that. But when I'm asked whether I regret the decision, you know, I have to say I take responsibility for it, but I can't regret the decision. And that's because if I were to say that to you, I mean, I wouldn't be saying what I think. And you see, the thing about this issue is it's still going on today. There is not a single part of the Middle East that is not touched by exactly the same problem we have in Iraq and in Afghanistan today. And my view is that the West has got to understand this is a generation-long struggle, and we've got to be in it.
What did you feel during those weeks after the war when the WMD didn't turn up?
I mean, it's a question that we were constantly asking people, of course. And indeed, we were one of the things that makes the notion that we...
Was it ghastly to think that we went to war and they're not there?
Well, look, it was the Casus Belli, was the WMD program. So, of course, you're constantly asking and indeed searching. So we did.
Afghanistan, which we haven't touched at all. Another war, another piece of nation building, now in trouble. We're talking about an exit route and all the rest of it. Doesn't that show a deep flaw in, as it were, the Chicago Doctrine, which is that the West does not have the staying power, if you like, the readiness to absorb casualties and the vast amount of money required to build new nations where there have been failed states in the past?
Well, that's, I think, the fundamental question. That it's a combination of hard and soft power that we need.
Are you worried about what's happening in Afghanistan now with you know, dates set for withdrawal? Hamid Karzai is saying that we're playing into the Taliban's hands.
Well, the key thing is to withdraw based on the job being done. Now, I think it's perfectly sensible to set out plans for troop drawdown, provided it's geared to...
But the job hasn't been done.
Well, we're not actually withdrawing them yet. So, no. I mean, the idea is obviously to make a big push forward.
You've mentioned already Iran.
Yeah.
And there is an enormous choice to be made about Iran, a more developed, more formidable, more populous, and certainly better armed country than Saddam's Iraq, whatever it was. Are you actually saying that we should threaten them militarily if they are determined to develop nuclear weapons?
I am saying that I think it is wholly unacceptable for Iran to have nuclear weapons capability.
But what can we do about it?
And I think we've got to be prepared to confront them.
Militarily?
If necessarily
Militarily?
If necessarily militarily. I think there is no alternative to that if they continue to develop nuclear weapons, and they need to get that message loud and clear.
After 9/11, you thought there was a sort of world war between Islamism and the West, however we define it.
Well, this extremist strain within Islam, yeah.
Yes.
You know, this is, it's a global phenomenon. And the sooner we understand that and deal with it and recognise, and this is the big choice.
Has the West got what it takes?
Well, I hope so, but it's got to recover its confidence in itself. And it's got to realise...
Partly so badly knocked over Iraq, of course.
Well, but it shouldn't lose its confidence over that. The fact is, the reason why it's been tough in Iraq is because people are driving car bombs into crowded markets and trying to kill the first 20, 30, 40, 50 people they see. That is evil and wrong, and we should be standing up against it and fighting it. We shouldn't be sitting there saying, well, maybe these people are just like that and therefore we should let them get on with it.
And similarly in Afghanistan, where there are attacks going on during the elections, people who are trying to get female candidates elected in Afghanistan and Kabul, same thing going on. We have to finish that job. The West has to finish that job before we pull out, or disaster.
Well, we have to finish the job, yeah, for sure. Look, what are the Taliban just a few days back? They're going to stone a couple to death because they're in love. I mean, what? You can't compromise with that. You've got to take it on.
So we have a moral obligation in our part of the world to change that society.
We actually have a reason of self-interest. I mean, there is obviously, you can't see some of the things they do, like executing teachers for teaching girls and not feel a sense of moral compulsion. But that's not actually the principal reason. It's a self-interested reason. This movement is still there. It is, I'm afraid, still strong. It has a narrative that reaches into a far larger part of the population that is to do with the West and Islam and so on.
Isn't it partly still strong because of the nature of our response? Because we went in so heavy, we went in so hard.
That's the debate, Andrew. That is absolutely the heart of the debate. And the West's got to resolve this debate. Is the reason why they're like that because of us, or is it actually because of them? Now, my view in the end is we should stop being in a situation where we think we've caused this. We haven't caused this. If you're a Muslim in this country, in Britain, you've got greater freedom than many Muslims in Muslim countries. I mean, it's nonsense. I know it's difficult. It will take a long time. But if we in Europe decide the pain is too great to stand alongside America, that's fine. But we'll find in the end we're obliged to deal with it at a later time and in an even more difficult and acute way. And if Iran ends up with a nuclear weapon, do not be under any doubt at all that will change the entire balance of power in the most troubled region of the world.
Tony Blair, we've talked vehemently about the world outside Britain. We're going to return to the here and now and to you yourself in the final section of the interview. Tony Blair's journey was a personal and political one. He now says he was terrified at every Prime Minister's questions. He owns up to cowardice in his early years as Prime Minister and describes himself as manipulative. He dreamt of leaving office early with his reputation and soul intact, still a friendly face in a friendly country. But as the attacks on him continued, he hardened until he says he felt armoured and able to float above the demonic rabble tearing at his limbs.
Let down my Labour! Let down my Blair!
Publicly loyal to his successor in number 10, he studiously avoided any comments that would undermine his old rival. And as the coalition swept into Downing Street earlier this year, no word from Tony Blair about his disappointment, or indeed what it would take to dislodge the new political masters. Now he travels the world, making money, and working on issues of faith, Middle East peacemaking and African governance. So what kind of man with what kind of politics has Tony Blair become? Let me start this section by asking about the economy during your time as Prime Minister. It seemed to many people as if in a sense you'd subcontracted economic policy to the Treasury and to Gordon Brown. Was it not simply a long bubble based on excessively easy rates of interest, a housing boom, people maxing out their credit cards, and indeed government borrowing?
First of all, I most certainly did not subcontract economic policy. The macroeconomic policy was very much on the lines that I not merely was was happy with, but was insisting upon. And no.